What is an algal bloom? Algal bloom is the rapid increase of algae in freshwater or marine water that can be very harmful to the environment. When fertilizers are laid down, the excess nutrients cannot be absorbed into the ground. So when the next rainfall comes, those excess nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen get washed off, and they can be absorbed into the clouds, and then and the rainfall it can carry into bodies of waters. But this causes a problem for lakes, ponds, streams, oceans, basically every type of body of water. This process is called eutrophication, and the increase of the amount of algae just on the surface blocks light, which makes the plants on the bottom not get light. And if you know anything about plants, they need light to survive. So those plants are going to die off and decay, and decaying life forms absorb oxygen, but so do plants. And so all the oxygen in the water is being sucked out of the water, causing what is known as a dead zone. And this is very harmful for animals and humans. And algae blooms can also release toxins that can be harmful or even cause death of animals and humans. And the process of algal blooms is it accumulates over time. So when a field in Indiana is being fertilized and washes into the Ohio, well, the Ohio washes into the Mississippi, and then the Mississippi goes into the Gulf of Mexico, which is actually called as the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So all these cities connected to the Ohio or the Mississippi or other rivers connecting into that all wash into one place, causing a massive algal bloom, causing one of these dead zones. However, not all algal blooms are caused from algae. Some of them are caused by cyanobacteria, which is a bacteria that obtain the energy through their energy through photosynthesis. So this is common to plants, and that it also absorbs oxygen. And this is what's known as harmful algal blooms that release toxins that can cause problems for humans, such as rashes, sore throat, even things like liver damage. And these algal blooms happen when things like agriculture runoff, urban runoff, residential runoff, and wastewater get washed into bodies of water, and they bring in these excess nutrients like phosphate, phosphorus, nitrogen, and nitrate. And with these excess nutrients and warm temperatures and shallow waters, it can lead to these algal blooms.
So now we're going to talk about ways to prevent algae blooms. The best way to prevent algae blooms is by stopping harmful runoff pollutants from entering different water sources altogether. As we learned in class, it is easier to fix an issue before it starts than try to fix it after it has already become a problem. For this, it'd be a lot easier to stop the harmful pollutants from entering the water than it would be to try to stop to try to control the algae blooms once they have formed in the water. Another example of this is kind of like the coronavirus, how it would have been easier to stop it early on than it is to stop and control it now, once it has become widespread and a big issue. Riparian buffers are a great way to keep water sources clean and to stop potentially harmful runoff from entering the different water sources. Riparian buffers are an area next to streams and rivers or lakes or different water sources that can protect the water from pollutants from the nearby land, whether that be pesticides from a nearby farm or just different waste. If there's like a business nearby or a parking lot or something. These buffers are highly vegetated areas, and they are highly vegetated, so the pollutants or different waste cannot get to the water because they will either be stopped by the vegetation or absorbed by the vegetation. On top of stopping the harmful runoff or waste from entering the different water sources, there are many other advantages that these buffers can bring to an ecosystem without there being many disadvantages to them. So, some other advantages that these buffers can bring is that they can provide a food source for different animals in the water. They can provide shelter for different animals in the water. The trees or bushes in the buffer can cast shade on the water, which can control the temperature of the water. These buffers can help stop erosion by making the bank of the water more sturdy. These buffers could temporarily hold off flooding if they had to, and they are relatively cheap and easy to install and create. So basically, they can definitely lead to a healthier ecosystem overall and help the areas around it as well. Some disadvantages of the riparian buffers is that they could take away from farmers' land where they could be potentially planting crops. This problem is actually being countered by farmers getting paid to add these buffers next to water sources on their land, so they're not losing any money from potential crops that they could be planting, and it's kind of a win-win for everybody because the water source is staying healthier with the buffer being installed nearby, and the farmer really isn't losing much because they're getting the money back that they could have been making from those crops planted in that area. And also, another disadvantage is that in some cases it could be hard to add these buffers to an area, since some establishments and businesses are built right on different water sources, like a lake or a river or something. So, some other methods that could be used to stop these algae blooms is biological augmentation, which is basically the addition of bacteria cultures to different water sources, which can help get rid of any contaminant that has entered the water. Another example is aeration. So if we're talking about like a pond or something, you could add these aerators or fountains, which would keep the water moving within the pond, which would make it harder for these algae blooms to grow. And another thing is just people caring for their local water sources. Maybe farmers using friendlier fertilizers, pesticides, or people not trying to litter next to water sources and just trying to keep these water sources clean, because it becomes a big issue if they get dirty and these algae blooms start to form.